especially when they see the notion that the physical infrastructure, like it did when we had virtualization, but at least we could still touch the servers, that the physical instantiation of what they are used to protecting and seeing is leaving, right? And this notion of heavy lifting of what's going to move and when and how, and ultimately how I'm going to protect assets that I can no longer see, I don't manage, and ultimately are so dependent on an infrastructure that I may not have transparency and visibility into, becomes a real challenge. At the same point in time, whether you believe in the public versus private and the applications thereof and the validity of these two models, the reality is a lot of what you should be focusing on from a security perspective is ultimately if there are risks that cannot be mitigated, if there are compliance frameworks that prevent you from moving to public cloud, you should be doing everything you possibly could to get your arms around being the champion from a security perspective and a risk model and threat model perspective of deploying private clouds. Right? Even if you don't believe in, even if private cloud to you means nothing more than virtualization, clearly you're already on that path. So if you have to start adding the word private cloud to your vernacular to get more budget, attention, and realization of the fact that you're building this, and then we get chargeback, and then we get ultimately self-service portals so that people don't have to bug IT to spin up apps, if you get your arms around that, by the time the critical apps that you're looking at are actually candidates to move to public-based cloud computing, you'll already understand the operational model and impact. But today we just are stuck. It's like analysis paralysis. We don't really understand what's available to us, so we don't do anything, or we just say no. And I don't mean to be preaching. This is just kind of a summary of what I hear every day, especially in the Fortune 500, right? And that's pretty much who I deal with: the government, Fortune 500. And strangely enough, when you look at what's happening in the U.S. government specifically, these guys are being incredibly aggressive about understanding what is a candidate to move to cloud computing, public or private, and moving it, right? For all the reasons you know about: cost, agility, flexibility, etc. So I think, when we look at what we're saddled with internally from a security perspective, and we look at statements like, cloud computing is more secure than non-cloud computing, it's kind of a ludicrous assertion, because really, if you look at a one-to-one application-to-application deployment perspective, maybe you could say that given what I get in platform, or even some things in infrastructure, certainly in software as a service, those guys are maniacally focused on service delivery, compliance, and yeah, maybe on a one-app-to-one-app basis, maybe it's true that a public cloud provider can do a better job than from a security perspective than an enterprise. Maybe. It's odd to me, however, that when you look at an enterprise that on average in the Fortune 500 has something like 20,000 applications with 4.5 versions of each application they have to support, one app to 80,000 apps is a big difference, right? 20 years of baggage and crap means that in many cases it's not a fair comparison, and it's difficult to explain to management why to support that app that they asked for last year that wasn't cloud, that now wants to move to cloud, that ultimately exposes confidential information, is not a good idea. They don't get, because they go home and they use the computing resources and it just works. So in many cases what that means is we've got to actually, from a security perspective, try to kill and retire as many of these bloated internal apps as we can. That sounds counterproductive, but when you think about it, how much time do you spend dealing with securing crap that is 10 years old, right? So for me, I would much rather talk about trimming the fat and focusing on the things that matter than supporting 20 years of bloatware, right? And I think we're starting to now get to the point where the compelling reasons for cloud, beyond cost, but from an agility perspective, a flexibility perspective, are starting to kind of sink in, right? Regardless of the operational models of how the security controls are deployed, security teams kind of get the benefit. In many cases now, they are getting involved, or they're forcing themselves in being involved with re-architecting applications for cloud-based application deployments. However, what's interesting is that one of the biggest value propositions for cloud is scale, but I'll just say that scale is not the only value proposition for cloud computing. Enterprises don't necessarily always need 10,000 virtual images of a particular application. And in fact, if you look at what virtualization did for us in the enterprise, it soaked up unused compute resources. So scale clearly wasn't a problem. Agility, flexibility, and efficiency were. But we get hung up on the fact that we're going to have massive scale, and how do I secure this? Ultimately, I think we should be just as concerned with the other elements: agility, flexibility, cost savings from a security perspective. There is, interestingly, however, your ability to get, as part of this 12-step fitness program, you can get absolutely ripped off if you don't pay attention to these cycles of investment across how vendors are retooling their solutions for you. So if yesterday you went to a vendor's website, right, and it said, we did this, this, and this in the physical appliance world, and then tomorrow you see the word cloud, and it's the same thing that's just basically been ported to a Linux virtual appliance that never was designed, for example, to scale, or ultimately was never designed to be licensed, doesn't have resiliency, doesn't have failover, doesn't have HA, ultimately relies upon the underlying virtualization platforms to funnel traffic up to it, but has an impact on overall I/O and throughput, or in converged networking infrastructures, can't see the difference between network and storage on the same pipes. You have to pressure vendors, and I am one, so I understand this whole process, right? You have to pressure vendors to explain what they do now in a virtualized environment and what is available in cloud and what those platforms and roadmaps look like. Because if you don't plan, you start buying 6 or 7 of these new toys to supposedly secure the new issues that you have in cloud, and 3 months from now, they become features, not solutions. You've wasted your money, right? And who and how you deploy is equally as important. So again, this is really about focusing on your core, right, on the things that matter most. So in many cases, if we can trim the fat, if we can deal with elements associated with understanding what these roadmaps and solution sets look like, we're going to be in a much better spot. We have the opportunity to really move this ball forward as much as cloud has done for computing in the way in which we enjoy that model, which should ultimately allow you to really then develop more bench strength, better flexibility, better agility, and essentially be able to provide better service, which is what we're all about. I think ultimately this means when you think on the long-term strategy, and you look at what we wrote about in the guidance, and you look at the top threats, and you look at where the industry is going, you know, this whole notion of you do not want to be the person who does not understand the implications of what virtualization and or cloud computing, or the two of them together, means to your security program and architecture. You do not want to be the world's biggest first cloud loser, right? We need to champion and lead with the fact, as the cloud providers do, they are essentially looking to differentiate on being able to offer secure cloud computing solutions. In many cases, depending on the delivery and deployment model, much of that is still relies on you for deployment. So I think we should champion that, right? One very interesting issue, however, that I think all of us are going to have to come to terms with, which is kind of step number 12 in a very locker roomish bit of humor, is don't drop the soap. And what I mean by that, the reason it's capitalized, is everything is now trending and moving towards being managed by APIs. So before, right, we kind of had a little bit of security by obscurity. Every single app, every single control had its own little unique interface, its own private management interface. Maybe it moved to a web-based interface, but everything was kind of managed discreetly. Well, now with automation, especially in cloud environments, especially, and in the virtualization space, what we're seeing is everything is exposed via an API. So being able to spool up images, turn things off, turn things on, reconfigure assets, move them. This is a new world for us, right? When we have to start thinking programmatically now, because all of these basic RESTful APIs that move over HTTP, or worse yet, SSL, that you can't man in the middle, now we have to think about how we're actually going to control interfaces to entire system stacks, which is really, really a fascinating aspect of managing stuff in cloud environments, especially from the perspective of security. So, I found these 12 topics to be kind of interest, thematically representative of what I talk to people about on a daily basis. And I just wanted to kind of reiterate the fact that cloud really should be thought of as a way for us to do security better. It's harder for people to get their arms around when they're in the middle of securing 20 years of crap, and now we have this thing that allows people to go out with a credit card and spin stuff up outside of your control. But I think if you look at disruptive innovation, you've looked at the patterns over time of how we've dealt with it and how controls kind of come to market and how long it takes. Vendors, both cloud and virtualization platform providers and security vendors, are actually doing more in a shorter period of time than I think they ever have before. Doesn't mean it's there yet, but ultimately what we need to do is leverage that. Go pound on your vendors, go pound on the cloud providers, demand transparency, get better capabilities built into these platforms themselves so that we can expose and do our jobs better. Ultimately, the 13th step is the all-important supplements portion. Yes. And, what I'd like to, if you haven't already, you probably know it and you probably read it. You should definitely go and read the Cloud Security Alliance guidance. I lead a team called a group called Cloud Audit, and what that is, it's actually we are releasing version 1.0 of the Cloud Audit deliverables this week. And what Cloud Audit does is it provides a common interface and namespace in ways that allow a cloud provider to automate the collection and presentation of all sorts of audit and assertion, attestation, and compliance information in one location that they can control authentication and access to. But everybody starts talking about presenting things in a common format using HTTP as a protocol that all tools and web browsers can use to consume this information. And we aligned that product to the Cloud Security Alliance's control matrix. So the first 5 compliance packs, as we call it, are PCI, COBIT, HIPAA, 853, and ISO 27001. And we'll add more. But what that allows you to do as a consumer or even cloud brokers is to go grab audit information in a real-time basis and allow providers, instead of answering 600 right to audit clauses every week individually, of doing it in a single way, a single presentation, which is pretty cool. So Cloud Audit is something you should look at. I write a lot on these topics, if you haven't seen my blog, and ultimately I'm going to be speaking in depth about how public infrastructure as a service delivery models and cloud providers fundamentally change the game as it relates to our ability to deploy compensating controls, specifically, and how we are focusing and responding as both as industry and consumers, and our need to kind of return to build survivable systems, things that still function under duress, as well as focus on the stuff that matters most, which is the information. So that's my talk tomorrow. I think it's at 10 to 11. So that said, I'm only like 2 minutes over. But again, the keynote here was supposed to kind of just get us wound up for the rest of the day. Hopefully it did a little bit of that. And with that, I will turn it over to Jim and get the rest of the show on the road. Thank you.